So, alle mal herkommen. Ich brauche hier mal einen Kreis um mich herum. Jetzt gleich. Come here. Make a circle around me now. That day, that smart German, immaculately dressed in his surgical uniform, walked into the room that Pesa and some other children, amongst them some twins, were staying in. They were staying at the gypsy camp, the Zigeunerlager in Auschwitz, in winter 1944. The children knew from experience that you should never, ever disobey a German, so they made sure to follow his orders immediately. I know, the man went on, you've been separated from your parents and your families, and I understand that you would like to be reunited with them. There's something I can do about it. All you have to do is to step into the middle. Jo, Mame, Tate, ich will bei dir sein. Jo, lo mir wiedersehen am Mishpoche. The language spoken in Pesa's family was Yiddish. Yes, mother, father, let us be a family again. And Pesa stepped into the middle. There was a little girl, a few years younger than 11-year-old Pesa, who had attached herself to Pesa. They were from the same hometown in Poland, in Ostrowiec. So whatever Pesa did, she did. When Pesa stepped into the middle, the little girl stepped into the middle. No sooner had Pesa stepped into the middle than her alarm bell set off. No, no, how can he know who my parents are? I must step out. And she stepped out. All of this only took seconds. It was like in, out. Pesa looked at the little girl, expecting her to follow. She made signs, urging her to come out of the circle. But the little girl stayed in. So did a few other children. The smart camp doctor, Dr. Josef Mengele, took the children with him, and they never returned. The next day, Pesa saw the children, saw their bodies lying in the snow. They had been shot dead, and the freezing temperatures were preserving their bodies. It was still winter. Where was everybody? The SS had left. Most of the adult inmates from the neighboring barracks had left, leaving the children behind, all on their own. There were no guards, no taskmasters, no torturers, nobody, nothing, a vacuum. Pesa and two other Polish girls, Miriam, 9, and Ruth, 11, as well as Gabor, 15, from Hungary, the twins Miriam and Eva from Romania, and 7 children from Czechoslovakia, the sisters Marta and Eva, Tommy and Robert, 11 years old, and Miriam and Robert and Tommy, 11 years old, and little Gabriel, who was only 7-year-old, the youngest of the group. All of these 13 children walked into the storeroom of clothes, intending to get themselves something warm to wear. The storeroom was packed with clothes, with heaps and heaps of clothes. There were so many that the children could hardly open the door. I'm going to get myself a pair of boots, Pesa was determined. A brown leather boot with grey felt immediately caught her eye. She pulled it over her leg and it fitted perfectly. She started looking for the matching boot. While she was doing so, the other children had found what they needed and were ready to leave, urging Pesa to join them. So she had to give up finding the matching boot. She randomly picked a boot from the pile of boots. It was a black boot with white felt and far too big, but never mind about that. She pulled it over her leg and she walked out of the storeroom of clothes with a pair of boots, and it felt like heaven. Pesa was so hungry, and she saw that the door of the pantry was open. So she sneaked into the pantry, and there on the kitchen table, she saw bread, piles of bread. She grabbed as much bread as she could possibly carry and tucked it away under her clothes. In no time, she had left the pantry, heavily laden with bread. There she stood, a little girl, outside, in the bitter cold, a little girl who hadn't experienced anything but gnawing hunger and numbing cold for 4 years. There she stood with an insulation of bread around her malnourished body. There she stood in the bitter cold of January 1945 in Auschwitz. Tommy, Pesa, Miriam, Ruth, Erika, Berta, Gabor, Eva, Martha, Gabriel, Robert, Miriam and Eva. These 13 children were standing behind the electric fence in Auschwitz, warmly dressed in a fancy mixture of clothes, of babushkas and mismatching boots. Who were these people? Were the Germans returning? No. These people weren't Germans. The Germans were always immaculately dressed and had these clanking boots, but these people, they looked worn and torn and looked beaten up. They were coming closer. They were entering the camp, and now they had reached the children. One man stepped out of the group and walked towards Pesa. He lifted her up and held her close to his body. He sat down and started rocking her in his arms. Oh, Pesa looked at him in amazement, trying to figure out what was going on as she watched tears running down the man's face. You don't mean there is somebody out there who cares for me? She hadn't experienced this feeling for 4 years, and it was truly overwhelming. The two of them, this random, disparate pair, just sat there in silence, squatting on the frozen ground of a concentration camp. Pesa, a little Jewish girl from Poland, being cradled by a Russian soldier. She felt safe in his arms as she watched this endless flow of tears running down his face. After a while, he let go of her. He opened his bag and took out some food Obviously, he wanted to share his food with Pesa. He offered her some of his food rations. She immediately declined, indicating, no, no, thank you. And she proudly pointed at her stash of food. All I need is bread, and I've got enough of that right here.